Welcome to a Super Bloom podcast. Hello, it's me, your host, Candice King. Well, if you've listened to this podcast, you know that back in a different life, back in the olden days, a long, long time ago, I would sing. I would open my mouth and sing musical notes, try to keep them on pitch as much as possible. I was a singer. That's how I moved to LA. I was going to be an international pop star. That was my big dream. And I was 16. I was very young when I moved out there. And I wasn't that bad. You know, I had a pretty good run in my musical career. I got signed to a record label. I was writing with a lot of incredible writers and artists at the time. And though that's not the direction my life continued, I really do look back with a lot of feelings about that time in my life. And one of the things I remember was just also how in awe I was of all the other young girls who were just going after it, who were like buzzed about, like everyone would talk about them. Because once you kind of get through the golden gates of a music label, at least back then, especially, this would have been in the early aughts. So once you would get through the golden gates into a record label, you suddenly then got this like idea of like who your competition was. And because it's not like they were like, yay, you get a record deal. Everyone gets to just go and like live their musical dreams. Then you had to like really hustle and work and kind of like fight for the right songs and to get attention from the people that you were working with so that they would actually want to support your career. And it was this whole other game. And one person that I really remember from that time, because I thought I'm like, oh my gosh, she just has it all. She's so cool. She had this like fiery, like orange red hair. Her music was so good. Like I remember her billboards around LA, and her name was Bonnie McKee. And I was on the TikTok, as you youths love to be on, and this wasn't too long ago. I did a very long jump cut from the early aughts to present day, and lo and behold, who popped up on my like For You TikTok thing, but it was Bonnie McKee. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's her. After all these years, like I hadn't thought of her. And then I saw her and I went into this whole deep dive on her career and her incredible career as a songwriter and her career as an artist and everything that she'd been through. And I was like, I feel like I finally have the guts to like actually be like, hi, Bonnie McKee. And that's what this episode is about. I finally, after all these years of being like, wow, she's like this golden child of the music industry from when I was like walking around LA. And I was really, really honored and humbled to be able to sit down with her today. And if you're like, Candice, who's Bonnie McKee? Well, first of all, listen to this episode and then you can go listen to all of her wonderful music on Spotify. But Bonnie McKee, she's an American singer-songwriter. She's also a director and an actress. She has co-written 10 number one songs and is particularly, you might know her from collaborating with Katy Perry. She co-wrote so many of her hits, including like California Girls, Teenage Dream, Last Friday Night, Roar. She's also co-written songs for pop stars like Britney Spears and Kelly Clarkson and Jason Derulo. Okay, that's not my best singing, but like I feel like I can't say his name. You always have to do that little like Jason Derulo. Like that's just it. I can't just say his name. Also Bonnie McKee is co-written for Christina Aguilera, and her music videos are to die for. They are so cool. But you might know her songs Slay, Hot City, and Don't Get Mad, Get Famous. It's all part of her forthcoming album, Hot City, which is a collection of her sparkly, fantastic anthems written in the golden era of pop music back from the 2010s. Yeah, she went back in her archive and is like, you know what? I'm going to do Bonnie's version. And we're going to talk about that today as well. I'm just so thrilled for this conversation. And if you listen to this episode and you're like, oh my gosh, I love Bonnie McKee now and I need to know everything about her, check out @Bonnie McKee. She is on social media platforms. She's on Instagram. You can go see her on TikTok. Go watch her music videos is all I can say. They're so fun. They're so fantastic. She's so fantastic. So without further ado, here's my long overdue conversation with the Bonnie McKee. really excited to be talking with you. I was trying to think if we'd ever crossed paths because I lived in LA and was in the music industry in the same years that like you were coming up in the music industry. And so I've known your name for a very long time, like publicly and like, in writers' rooms and hearing of you for a very long time. And it's like watching you like not only share your story on social media in such a really beautiful, vulnerable way, but also kind of like reclaim your name has just been such a joy.
Thank you.
Like after all these years of like knowing who you were. And I like have this very vivid memory of driving around LA and like knowing like I, even with your record where it was like the blue cover and you have your like signature orange red hair and like your bright red hair and you were like blowing a bubble and the light bulb is right above you, and I just was like, she has it all figured out, like she
right
is a
oh my gosh, especially then I definitely did not.
But it's so we actually have a very similar, very different trajectories but similar points on the map in which we were in similar. So I too moved to LA when I was 16 and you did as well. You're from Seattle though, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yep. I moved down to LA by myself at 16, almost 17, got a record deal and just kind of made it work, sort of thrown to the wolves a little bit.
And when you were in Seattle, which obviously like ties into, I think, what became like so beautifully magic about you throughout your career was that like you not only were singing and you were playing piano, but you started songwriting at a very young age.
Yeah. Actually, when I was a kid, I wrote poetry. I was really into poetry and I would like go to poetry slams, which is kind of embarrassing, but I would go and read my poetry in talent shows and stuff. Like I love to write and I love to sing. And it wasn't until I was like 12 years old or something that I realized that there was such a thing as like a songwriter, that was something that I could do. And I always wanted to be a singer. And I remember my mom was friends with this guy, Jonathan Poneman, who like signed Nirvana back in the day. It was like the only music industry person in Seattle at the time. I gave him a demo tape of a bunch of my just like cover songs. Like I covered like Jewel and Carole King and Fiona Apple. And he's like, oh, that's great. You can sing, but can you write? And I was like, I took that as a challenge and I went home and I started writing songs. And of course, the first ones I wrote were absolutely terrible. But once I realized that could be an outlet for me, especially being an adolescent, really going through a lot and having some trouble at home and stuff, like it became an escape for me and an obsession. And I've been writing songs ever since.
It is interesting, like this generation of adolescents, like they have the internet for their feelings, whereas like our generation had like diaries and like, journaling and like I had like that's where I would put all of my emotional, like my big feelings is what I call them to my children, like your big feelings that you don't really know what they are, but I'd put them into like journals and writing things down and listening to music and just and making things and collaging and like things that like don't really matter in the bigger sphere of art, but like that it was an outlet for me. And I feel like it's interesting. I like can't imagine not having that at that point in life when like you're just rushed.
Well, it's funny you say collaging. Like that like brings back so many memories. Like I was big into collaging too. Like back when magazines were like so important. Like I would go through the Nylon magazine and the Rolling Stone and the whatever, and I would rip out pages and put them on my wall and glue things to paper, like cover one of my journals and like a little hodgepodge of inspirational pictures. And that's kind of like, I guess, what kids do with the internet now, where it's like people collect memes and kind of make their own little videos. I don't know. I have gotten into TikTok in recent years, and I was very reluctant to it at first, where I felt like it was like, I'm too old for this, or like, I don't want to dance around in my living room or whatever it is. But I realized like I'm a director as well, and I direct all my music videos and all that. And I love directing and video as an art form. And I find it really cathartic and fun. And that's kind of like why I got into making music too, was because I was really inspired by watching the music videos of Madonna and Michael Jackson and Prince. I grew up on MTV. So it's kind of fun to be in the TikTok world and use video as, an outlet for art.
Yeah. So you moved to LA when you were 16. Did you have the record deal before you moved there? Did you move there and then you kind of started getting pitched around to or introduced to labels?
Well, I made a demo of original songs when I was still in Seattle for a school project. I had actually gotten kicked out of school. I got kicked out of high school in 9th grade.
For what?
But my parents had already paid for this, like an intensive week where like some kids would go and like, plant trees in the park or like whatever interests you might have. And mine was music. And so we had already prepaid for this like music studio session. And so I was like, well, I may be kicked out, but I paid for that studio and I'm going to go. And so I went and recorded the demo of original songs, like some of the first songs I ever wrote. And I had a CD burner because it was, the late 90s. And so I could burn like 5 CDs at a time. And I was like, I'm basically like a record label. And then I gave it to everyone I knew.
You're like, this is exactly how it works.
Yeah. I gave it to everyone I knew. And someone at my school babysat for someone who knew someone in LA. And this guy wanted to manage me. And he came up and met my parents and everything. And then brought me down to LA and introduced me to an attorney. And he got it played. He got my demo played on Mornings Eclectic, which is a radio show on NPR. And then there was a bidding war, just like kind of out of nowhere. So it really was like an old fashioned, like plucked from obscurity, didn't have any family in the biz, didn't know anything about the music industry. I didn't know the difference between a producer and a mixer and I didn't know that was a thing. And so I really kind of had to learn on my own.
And did either of your parents or did you have anyone in your family move down at that point? Or were you just 16? Were you living on your own? Did you live with another artist or someone from the label set you up with someone?
No, I was in Los Angeles living by myself in an apartment in West Hollywood. It was intense. Like all of my peers, which I didn't have any friends my age in LA at all. And all of my peers back in Seattle were still in high school. And so I had just like a long days of just like sitting around going like, what am I supposed to do with myself? Like, is this what grown up life is, And so I wrote, I kept honing my craft. I spent a lot of time in the studio, but then there was a lot of time not in the studio because like, I didn't really understand that like when you get a record deal, it's like, you just think it's going to go a certain way and it doesn't,
Yeah. I was in Orlando, Florida and made a demo. And it was my dad, like, gave it to someone on the golf course that knew someone that knew someone that knew someone that then took it off someone else's desk because they weren't interested. Mm-hmm. But I was 16 when I moved to LA and my mom came with me. And then it all happened very quickly of like getting signed and then getting a publishing deal and then being like, oh, I've made it. This is it. And then having it turn very differently. Or I was like, well, now what do I do? And, and just like this bizarre, weird thing where like I look back on, I've been reckoning, like I've been having I think about that time a lot now because I look back and realize just how young I was.
Yeah. Like, have you seen a 16-year-old lately? It's like, they're babies.
I know. Like, they're actual babies.
I'm like, what the hell?
And not only that, but then realize the difference of like that I was a woman, I was a young girl constantly in rooms with older men.
Oh, yeah.
Constantly. Mm-hmm. Constantly. And I look back on all these writing sessions and maybe there'd be a woman, but like every once in a while. But a majority of the time it was sitting down and explaining my young female teenage feelings to older men. Uh-huh. Like, did you, so, and something that like, and now the record industry is completely different. But at this point, it was still a machine. Like you get signed, you're putting together a record. If you are a writer, you would go into different things like writing sessions, which still happen today. But where you would go in, you'd sit down with like complete strangers and see if you could all write a song together until you kind of find the grouping of strangers that make like something magical, and then you usually move on and continue working with them to make a record. Mm-hmm. But for you were writing independently. But did you do the rounds where you were like writing with like the Matrix and and all the people?
I wish, God, I would have loved to write with the Matrix. Are you kidding? I honestly, it still was just so naive about like all of the different jobs in the music industry and all of the different tools available to me. Because I wrote all of the songs myself on the first album. It was like the album was written when they signed me. I didn't want to co-write. I didn't understand even what that was. And so I was just kind of, they put me in with Rob Cavallo, who produced Green Day and Michelle Branch and all these people, amazing producer. And now like looking back, I'm like, why would they not put me in with other writers, But they had this idea that I was like this precious little prodigy or something. And that it was just like, I write everything myself. And that was like very important. And I guess it was important to me too, because I was like, why would I need to write with someone else. The song's already written. But I really wish that I had started earlier co-writing, because, you know, I see some of these other artists, like, you know, the Olivia Rodrigos of the world or whatever, where it's like they're writing incredible songs because they're putting her, well, first of all, shout out to Olivia Rodrigo, because when I was like, oh, I'm sure that this is like all of the best people are on this, blah, blah, blah. And it's just her and one other person that wrote the whole first album. And I was like, that is really impressive. And it means that she can really write, you know, like you said, you find the people that you work well with and you kind of stick with it.
I feel like there's soulmates in a way, like there's like musical soulmates, you know what I mean? Where there's no other relationship in which they would work. You know, it's not like a marriage. It's not a friendship. It's not even a business relationship. It's this weird songwriting soulmate.
Yes. And when you find those people, like hold dear, because they're hard to find. They're rare. But yeah, so I didn't really do the rounds as far as songwriting with other people. So I didn't learn how to co-write until after I had been dropped, or I guess right before they put me in with I went from like being the darling of the CEO at Warner Brothers to working with like a junior A&R. And I was like so annoyed. And I was like, you know, because I was used to being like the little princess in the building. And I was like, how dare you put me in with this like junior A&R that just started. And he actually introduced me to a bunch of people that I still am friends with, producers and writers. And I started collaborating. And that was really my first experience with that. And I met a producer named Oliver Goldstein, who was one half of Oliver, which is an electronic group, but didn't exist yet. But it was, I had found my like musical soulmate. Like I was like, oh my God, like you hear what I hear. And like we, you know, we're just like so in sync. And we ended up dating for 8 years actually, but we came up together in the industry, and we both signed to a small boutique publishing company at the time called Pulse Recording. We were like client number 1 and client number 2. And now it's like a big, crazy publishing company. But yeah, he taught me a lot about like how to collaborate. And it's really kind of an ego death, because when you're used to doing everything yourself, then when someone comes in the room and like has a better idea than you, it's like, how dare you? Or someone's like, I think it could be better. It's like, like, it's terrible. It's like really terrible. And I run into that with young writers now, where it's like, I'll go in with an artist and they're just like really resistant to me, like having any feedback. So I try to be gentle because I remember what that felt like. Yeah. But like, once I opened up to collaboration, it was just like a whole new world. It was so beautiful, because it's like, if someone has a great idea and it's better than mine, then I get to put my name on it. I get to be a part of that, and we get to collaborate, you know, I get to like build off of that. But it definitely is difficult, I think, for young artists and writers to get used to collaborating.
Before you entered into, you know, this a completely new chapter of your career, specifically in collaborating, you mentioned getting dropped from your label, and I remember, like, I was 18 when I got dropped, and I just remember thinking, what do I do when the biggest goal I'd ever set for myself, I accomplished it, and then it's over. It's over before it began. Now what? And I'd spent so much time either in the studio, in writers' rooms, like this was my entire identity. And then kind of being constantly put on hold and not allowed to like, no, we don't want you to perform here yet. No, we're not going to put this out yet. No, you actually need to go be at events. You need to be on the arms of men and get yourself in magazines. You need to go do this. You need to go do that. But until you do all this, we're not going to put you out. And so I would try doing all these things that didn't contribute to anything having to do with music. And then still at the end of it was just completely dropped. And also within that are the politics of like Hollywood and partying and and I just remember feeling like a washed up 18-year-old. And I was like, how did this happen so quickly?
God, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, I remember like crying on my 18th birthday because I was like, I'm no longer a Lolita. I can't be like Britney Spears. I can't be, you know, it was like I had expired. And it was very different then, where it was like you really had to be like a teenager for anybody to give a shit, you know? And I'm grateful that that's changed. But yeah, I remember feeling washed up too. And also, you described it perfectly, of like coming out here and being like, okay, I did it. Like I got a record deal and I did it. And now I've made it. And like that is just the first step of so many, and just like blind luck too, of things lining up, all the stars aligning. So yeah, that was like really devastating. When I got dropped, I was like, I mean, I was miserable there. They were holding me hostage for like 6 years. And so I didn't get dropped. Maybe I got dropped when I was like 19 or 20, actually. So yeah, like 4 or 5 years. I was like, what now? And what is the point? And because also I didn't understand that it's kind of a rite of passage to get dropped.
Yeah.
Like, you know, Lady Gaga, Bruno Mars, Pink, like all of these huge artists, Katy Perry.
Katy Perry got dropped so many. I just remember, how many times was it? Like 3 or 4, 4 times. I mean, I remember we're just running around in all those circles. Like we had to have ended up at like some,
I'm sure we did,
party or event or one of the things, or in some, you know, room across from each other. But everyone got dropped. But it hurt so bad. I took to it very differently than I now look back and see how other people took to it.
Yeah, I was really like, my life is over, and I literally wanted to die. Like I was like, and I just drank myself into oblivion. I just like went hard into like alcoholic and drugs and the whole thing. I already had been struggling with that as a teenager, so I had already had this whole sordid past living in Seattle. And so when I got the record deal, I was like, finally, it's all over, and now my life is going to be great. And then it's like when I lost this dream that had kind of been my North Star my whole life, where I was like, if I could just get a record deal and be a star, then everything's going to be fine. And then like when that went away overnight, I was like, what's the point in living? Like I no longer have anything guiding me. And so, and you know what? I'm so grateful for that, because I think that if everything had just worked out how I had dreamed it would, that I would not have, I needed to be humbled, and I needed to fall on my face to grow. And, you know, there are a lot of artists that I've worked with that it all worked out the first time around when they were really young. And I feel like whatever age you become famous and successful is the age you stop progressing. And I see that in some artists where I'm just like, yeah, you never really made it past 15, did you? Because it's like, you don't have to, everyone's going to do shit for you. Like, you don't have to learn how to do laundry. You don't have to learn how to balance a checkbook. You don't have to really learn anything, because someone's always going to be there to do it for you.
Or learn how to look at the world through someone else's experience.
Totally.
And
yeah, because like the whole world revolves around you, because that's what it's like when you're a teenager. And so it was really important for me to fall on my face. You know, I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. Now, I read in one of your interviews, I think there's also a misconception of like, you sign a record deal and then you're just set for life and you just make it like, and especially at that point, the record deal, the publishing and record deals that they were still handing out at that point were like impressive, like financially.
Yes.
They were very hefty checks, but that was all you had to live off of while, you know, doing all of these other things. And you know, it's just, especially if all the money's kind of going out and nothing's coming in. So I think that that's also something people forget, is like you might get a signing bonus and a signing deal, but it is not like any sort of a life, you know, long-term changing contract. And when you're young and you don't know how to manage money, I mean, it's really, I think it's just like such a important part of your story that like you came to LA, you had like such this, like everything you could have ever wanted, and then had to basically start over anew and kind of rebuild from scratch. Like, could you share a little bit about that period of time where, you know, you kind of were realizing like, is this it? Now what do I do?
Yeah. I mean, I was determined to do something. I didn't finish high school. I had never had a normal job other than working at Baskin Robbins when I was 14, which I was also fired from, by the way. And I was like, what am I going to do? Actually, it's funny. My mom is really into Vedic astrology. And so she had this Vedic astrologist that she had been seeing since I was born, basically. And he had like read my chart many times, like read your star chart and whatever. And she was like, why don't you talk to Chakrapani? And so I had a meeting with him, and he was like, yeah, you need to just put pen to paper. And I was like, what does that mean? And he was like, write, you have to write. And I was like, okay, but like, when is it going to all happen? And he was like, not till 2010 or something. I was like, what? Because that was like 4 years away. I was like, fuck this. Like, no way. This guy is out of his mind. But like, what else?
We're going to have flying cars by then.
Yeah, totally. Totally. And so I was like, okay, well, whatever. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. But so I had met Oliver, this producer, and I was just in the studio and just like kept writing and got my first cut ever with Elliot Yamin, who was an American Idol runner-up. And I got like a bonus track on like the Japanese version of and I was like, wow, I did it. Like I did something. And I remember like going home for Thanksgiving and my family being like, what are you doing with your, like, what does that mean? I was like, you don't understand. Like I got a cut. Like, that's so hard to do. And and then I was like, okay, well, this is a challenge. I'm going to try to do that. And I was like singing demos for money and whatever. But like, I always in the back of my mind was like, I'm an artist and I just want to get there again. But, you know, the more I was in the rooms writing with people, the more word got out that I was good at what I did. And I met Katy Perry just completely randomly, just all the stars aligned at Wasteland, which is a thrift store in LA on Melrose. And we were both selling our clothes because we were both broke artists that had just been dropped. And we were kindred spirits. We became friends. She actually came up to me and was like, oh, you're Bonnie McKee. Like you know, back then my name was like buzzing around LA. You know?
Yes, you were yes. Yep.
Even though like it never went anywhere or whatever. But like if you were in the scene, then she knew my name and she knew the album and she was quoting lyrics and stuff. And I was like, wow, like another person that's my age that does what I do. And so we were fast friends and we had very similar tastes and like aesthetics. And so she went on to do One of the Boys and blew up and we were still friends or whatever. And then on the second album, she and Dr. Luke called me in to write on the second album. And I was like scared because Luke signed me because I had been getting like little cuts here and there, whatever. And because Katy had told him that, you know, who I was and whatever. And so
was Dr. Luke a manager of like his own kind of like writing?
He has a publishing company. Yeah.
So it's a publishing company.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so he ended up signing me as an artist and as a writer. And it was like, okay, so we're going to work on Katy's stuff and then we'll get to your stuff. And I was like, okay, great. And so I worked on the Katy stuff. And then it was like, okay, now Britney Spears. And I was like, okay, but like, what about me? And then it was like, but now Kesha. And it was just like, but these were huge rooms. Yeah. And these were like big, you know, I was working with Max Martin and Benny Blanco and Circuit and all these huge producers and writers. And I was like, how do I say no to this? And I was starting to get known as a songwriter. And it was like, it was awesome to be, you know, respected and have people know my work. But it was also like a little bit of a trap because people started seeing me just as a songwriter. And so when I came in to do the artist thing, it was like, isn't she a songwriter? It's like weird. It's like you really get pigeonholed in this town where it's like people can only see you as one thing. And I've definitely had that happen with people before where I have seen where it's like, oh, like there's this intern that I befriended that works at my publishing company or whatever. And like, he is an intern. In my brain, you were an intern. And it's like, oh, by the way, I'm a songwriter. And it's like, no, you're an intern. Like, yeah. I can't like take you seriously because I saw you in this role and then they turn out to be amazing. And I'm like, okay, like that's how people saw me, where it's like, you are this one thing and that is how I see you. So it took a lot of me like making noise to really convince people that I am an artist and I always was one, you know?
Well, yeah, it's been interesting. Like there's a few, and specifically women I know who are songwriters who also have always been artists. And like that, what you're describing is also sentiments maybe that I've heard as well, that it's just like when things are going so well. Like I think that that's kind of like can be such a tricky thing in life is when, especially as artists, when you have something that you're so passionate about and the art that you want to make and put out into the world. And it feels like, why is this not like, when is it my time? When is it the time for this to start working? And something else is working. And when someone's like, well, don't fight the thing that's working because you also need to eat. You also need a roof over your head.
Totally. Yeah.
And the things that were working for you aren't necessarily like, it did not just stay, you know, extra cuts off of a, you know, Japanese released record. It was like you were writing Grammy nominated songs. Like you were going to all the events and all the parties. But more importantly, you were in the room where it happened, where people would come together and celebrate those who are like the most successful within the industry of artists and the creators of that art. So I can imagine it must have been a very odd time to be kind of getting everything you've ever wanted, but not in the way you pictured it happening.
Definitely. And I was like, I was so grateful because I had been so broke. Like you said, when I got my first record deal, I had a huge record deal and they gave me a lot of money And I didn't know anything. Again, I didn't know how the industry works. So I was like, oh, wow, you just gave me all this money because like I'm that good. Like didn't understand that that's the budget to make the album. Like it's not just money because you're cool. It's money that is in advance that you have to pay all of that back. When my money ran out, I was like, okay. I was literally like scrounging for change in the couch to eat at Taco Bell. Like I was broke and my hot water got turned off and my cell phone got turned off and I didn't have a car. Like I was broke. So it was like such a blessing that Katy came into my life and that I was able to work on those albums and not only like survive and, you know, have enough money to live, but to make a name for myself and make a mark on pop culture history. Like I'm incredibly grateful for that. But it was definitely really hard for me as, you know, a 24, 25-year-old girl that really, really wanted to be an artist and really wanted to be seen, to stay in the shadows, to stay behind the scenes. That was like incredibly painful for me. But, you know, so I went out and just did it on my own instead.
You've mentioned that experience of writing with Katy on her second record and like saved your life, not only financially, but also gave you something else that like was so much more important in your life rather than the like parties and drugs and alcohol, that that was like the big shift. You've opened up a lot about your sobriety. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely like, you know, like I said, after I got dropped from the first album, I really spiraled into my alcoholism and my using. I just kept my head down and just worked, but was like, you know, using a lot the entire time. And then when this golden opportunity fell in my lap, I was like, I am getting a second chance. And like that really does not happen that often in this world. And I don't want to fuck it up. So I ended up getting sober. And, you know, my partner at the time was also struggling. And so I learned about 12-step program and, you know, programs for people that love addicts. And I just learned a lot about myself and started hearing myself in people's stories when I was going to these meetings and stuff. So I ended up getting sober and it was like a huge spiritual awakening. And it was like the whole universe opened up for me. And it also helped me a lot with my resentments about feeling unseen, about, you know, existing in the shadows and all these things. And I was really able to tap into gratitude because that's really where I should have been. And like, I'm just incredibly grateful for that. I've just learned a lot and it really changed my life. So yeah, I'm coming up on 12 years sober now. And it's the best decision I ever made.
It's interesting. Like I have even a difficult time sometimes being in LA because it is just so, people are constantly, you sit down to have a meal with someone and they're usually, and I don't want to generalize, but I'm sorry, it's pretty hard not to generalize sometimes, or you, especially people that are in any of the industries in entertainment in LA, they're usually looking at if someone else has entered the building or like who else is here? Well, what's the next thing? Well, who's on the billboard? Who's that? Like your social currency is so much like the most important thing of like what you're worth to other people. It can be. And it's so interesting. And it like, that's been an interesting thing that I've had to really reckon with too, is like, is ego and identity according to how someone else sees me as opposed to how I see myself. And I have limited myself so often because I've just decided to accept someone else's version of me as my own.
Yeah.
And so to be able to, you know, have the experience where you have success, you sit down with your ego or the green one-eyed monster, whatever you like, have different names for it, but whatever you want to call it, and be like, we're going to have a reckoning. Like we're going to get to know each other and like, I'm going to take over from here.
Yeah.
And to be able to say, I know my voice and I'm ready to make my own record on my terms. Like to do that all within your 20s, I think is fucking incredible because it usually takes people a lot longer.
Well, you know, I got sober when I was 28. So, you know, I was almost to 30. I didn't, it certainly didn't happen overnight. But yeah, what you were saying about, you know, it's really difficult being a creative, having your livelihood, having like the work that you do be reliant upon others' validation. It's like, I can make art for myself and that's great, but I also have to eat. So I have to make something that other people like. And like your whole existence revolves around other people liking you and liking your art. Where it's like other jobs you can go in and like do a good job and it doesn't matter if someone likes it or not. It's not subjective. It's like you did the job, you get paid. And now in the creative field, it's really like our whole identities are tied up in success. And that's one of the biggest things that I've had to grapple with. And one of the biggest lessons that I learned that I don't think I would have learned if I hadn't gotten sober, which is that, I found myself, even when I was like killing it and I had like 5 number ones on the radio in one summer, like it was insane. And I was like, I want more. Why am I unhappy? It's like this never ending void. And I realized that I had made success my higher power, which is like living in a sandcastle. Like you have no control over whether other people like your work. I have no control over that. And even, I've seen plenty of artists over the years, like spend a ton of money, or like labels will sink millions of dollars into something and it just doesn't work. Like you can't control it. And so that's a moment of surrender where you have to be like, all I can do is show up for the work and like try to enjoy myself doing it. And because I stopped enjoying it, I was just like, creating under the gun. And I think it's just important to enjoy what you do and like stay out of the results. And like, I feel like if you enjoyed the process, then it is success. Then you got to spend your life doing something that you love, and not always chasing the next number one, always chasing the next thing. It's just exhausting and it's totally out of your control.
Did it feel liberating to write for yourself again?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely. And especially, so I got a second record deal. I signed with Epic and I put out American Girl. And I was simultaneously recording my album and the Prism album with Katy. And so I was like, it was double duty and it was a lot and it was really hard to split my attention. But obviously, like, that album was extremely important. And I love working with Katy and the whole dream team that we had put together. It was hard to do both, but it was such a nice time because I had a label that was like paying for the studio and I had a nice studio to go to. And I had, when I picked up the phone to work with someone, they answered and I was like, oh, I'm just so happy to be here. Like where people just want to work with me because my whole plan was to like be a songwriter, right? So that I can be an artist, so that I can legitimize myself and then I can get in the rooms. And I'm not just this tarnished artist that was once dropped. Because in my head, I was like, oh God, I'm useless because I was dropped and like, no one wants to work with me and blah, blah, blah. It didn't work the first time, so it's never going to work. But now that I've written these songs for other people, now everyone takes me seriously and now I can get in the rooms and, make the album I want to make. And so I made a whole album. I put out American Girl. It did pretty well, but, wasn't, I was competing with Roar on the radio. I was competing with myself, which was strange. But then when it came to putting out the second single, the label was like, yeah, great. It sounds great. We'll do that. And then I went on tour. I fronted the money for the tour. And then halfway through the tour, the label called and was like, we actually don't think the second single is a hit. So we're pulling out. And I was like, okay, but like, I'm already on tour. I'm already promoting this and I already paid for it out of pocket. And they were like, yeah, I don't know. And so I was like, okay, I'm out of here. So I left the label. I was not dropped. I left because I was like, I've already done this. I don't want to do this again. I don't want to be held hostage again. And so I left but they owned the masters and there was nothing I could do. So I wrote Bombastic, and Bombastic was my first independent release. And that was kind of my like, fuck you to the industry, where I was just like, I know none of y'all believe me. None of y'all see what's happening, but I'm about to come. I'm bringing Bombastic. And I ended up getting a bunch of syncs. And that's when I really learned about like the power of owning your masters and also sync money was really, I was like, oh my God, like I know how to write for sync, which is like a specific way to write a song, which is like broad enough that anyone can relate to it. And like having non-lyrical hooks, like, like that works for every movie trailer, And I was like, okay, I know how to do this. And so I ended up getting like 25 syncs on this little EP and I still get them. So I was like, okay, like it was like, yeah, Phoenix rising from the ashes again. This was my second, like, had it all, lost it all, got it all, lost it all again. And so, at this point, I'm just like, it's a roller coaster. And I never will feel like, oh, it's over for me, because there's always a new chapter.
Yes, there really is always a new chapter. It is also crazy, like how quickly the industry changed in that period of time. Because where you started, I mean, Apple Music wasn't even around. You know what I mean? This is like when people were also, I just remember being asked by like a bunch of like suits, like, well, what are your MySpace plays like? And me being like, you're on MySpace? I don't know. Like it was just so confusing to me. Like this, like to go from like big label deals, you had to be like a teenager, you had to be like look a certain way, be a certain way, be pitched maybe for reality. Remember when everyone had a fucking reality show? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, like, a little over 10 years later, and it is like, no, you can make a record, own it independently, record it on your own terms, put it out, and be able to control the financial distribution of it as well. Like that blows my mind because it all went so differently. Before I forget, these two questions that popped in my mind as you were talking, do you distinctly remember a difference between like your first label experience and like, and even the second and being an independent artist? Like just because I got out of it. Like I did not have a good experience. I never went back. I just decided, you know what? I am tired of being told by men that like I'm so great that they need me there in the room, like they have to have me, only to be told, actually, you're not that great, and why are you even here? Like I just couldn't be told by men anymore, you're so talented. I changed my mind, actually, you're pretty shit. Like I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna not be talented, and I'm just gonna be shitty, and I'm just gonna remove myself from the equation. That's for me to work out with my therapist in time. But like hearing you talk about this experience, like was there a shift later on? Were there more women? Was it more encouraging? Like have you noticed even in the independent, like does it feel different now?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, I think that, okay, here's the thing. In my first deal, and I see people still doing this, and I think it's really fucked up. Like, I was 16, 17 years old. I have all of these grown-ups, because I was a child, all of these grown-ups telling me I'm a genius, telling me that I'm a prodigy, telling me that, oh, you're not even going to be able to walk down the street. Like, you're going to be mobbed. You're going to be on TRL. You're going to da-da-da-da, just blowing smoke up my ass. And I believed it because why wouldn't I? Why would they lie? And then when that didn't happen, it's like such a huge letdown. And it's kind of like finding out that Santa Claus isn't real, And then when I had my second deal, I was obviously way more experienced and like had already had a bunch of hits and like been in the room when big shit happened. Like I understood how it all worked. And like, I remember I went, God. I went to the label in New York. American Girl has a lyric about Slurpees. I had not met anyone at the label. I had met L.A. Reid, who signed me originally, and like maybe one other person. But like I live in L.A., it was all in New York. So I went out to New York to like meet the label or whatever. And I walked into a boardroom and the entire staff was applauding and everyone had Slurpees. And I remember being like, this is bullshit. This is bullshit. This is like I'm not a little kid. Like, I know that none of you really actually give a shit about me. None of you know me. None of you know who I am. Maybe you heard the song. But like it had just come out. It was just kind of starting. It's not like I had like a long relationship with this label and that everyone was just so happy to see me. I was like, this is so disingenuous. Like, yuck. I just really didn't like, even though it was just like a nice gesture, but I was like, I don't like this. And
you could see through it. Yeah. You could see right through it.
Yeah. And I see labels doing that to young artists too, where like, when they get like an A&R will come and be like, oh, well, I mean, she's a genius when she's playing Madison Square Garden, da, da, da. And then behind their back, they're like, this project is going nowhere. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, what? Why do you do that to people? It's terrible. It's just like lying it's like cheating or something with a spout. Like it's gross. So I think that my experience changed because I could see through it, but I still see a lot of that same kind of psychological bullshit. I do see more women now. And also obviously since Me Too, people have to be a lot more careful. God, when Me Too happened, it was like, have you seen that movie Pleasantville?
Yeah.
Where
it was like everything's
in black and white. Yeah. And then like something happens and they start to see in color. Like that was what the Me Too movement was like for me, where I was like, I had been living in the world in the patriarchy and just accepted that that was how the world was and didn't think it would ever change. And then when people started speaking, I was like, ugh. And then I was looking at my life and looking at all of the experiences that I'd had and like so many interactions, like the majority of my interactions in professional music industry situations fit into Me Too. You know what I mean? Of just like
Yep.
inappropriate objectification, overstepping, abusive, like, and I was like, oh my God, like I'm part of the problem, because like I was just like, yep, that's just how, I remember like walking into a room and having a big executive be like, give us a spin. And then I'd be like, okay. And I would like do a little spin, like, ugh, it's just so gross. So it has changed in that way.
I was 8, I think I'd turned 18. So that's why they were like, well, it's legal.
Yeah.
But it was a manager of mine and like the head of the label that I was on, debating of like sending me down a carpet with like, I don't know how old he is. He's like a very big rock star who was very who like, it would have been but like, just to get me photographed on a carpet. And he was in his like, maybe he was 40 at this point, definitely late 30s, but like trying to be like, yeah, just go. Like, and then a manager being like, no, she's not doing, I'm just being like, oh, there's these grown men arguing of like where to place me on another man for photographs.
Yeah.
And like, or just feeling like, even just remembering things in a different, like just being like the head fuck of like, I remember having to like sing, like there was some meeting where they were like, hey, can you just sing this thing real quick? And so I sang it, and I just remember I felt so much shame, and my A&R in the middle of it, an older man who, a lot of problematic things, but at that point I sang, and then he went, she can sing, who knew? Oh. And I just remember feeling like I was so young and just feeling like so ashamed, like, wait, am I not good? Like, why am I here?
Why I'm here? Yeah.
Isn't that why I'm here? Then what the fuck am I doing here? Like, what am I doing here? And it was just such a mind fuck on, and what my issue is, especially with young women, is it's like, we're already told by the patriarchy that we're too loud, or like, are you sure that's your opinion? It might not be the right one. Like, we've already been mansplained about the world enough, especially at that age, where it's like, girls are good girls, and you're just quiet, and you have to be polite. But then when you are bold enough to even engage in like creating your own art and being told that like, I don't know if this is like what the world, like we have to have an opinion about it, like as a group full of men, it just makes me so sad, because it ruins it. It diminishes this beautiful, beautiful thing that we should all as humans be like, encouraged to like story tell and create art in the world. Like that's what keeps us all going. Like,
yeah, it's really bizarre. It's really bizarre. I remember like this is like kind of the opposite of that, but I was like, in my head, I wanted to be Madonna. But then what I wrote was like Fiona Apple. Like there was a big disconnect between like who I was like persona wise and who I wanted to be as a performer, and then like the music that actually came out of me, which is where I really should have been put in with the right producers and songwriters to be like, oh, okay, you want to sound like Madonna or whatever, then work with this person. And so they really wanted me to be girl behind the piano, and I wanted to dance and I wanted to perform, and I was like miserable being in like adult contemporary land at 17. I was like, I'm so bored. Like, this isn't what I want to be. And so I remember I played some showcase that was like not very big, and I was going to wear a little denim mini skirt, because like denim mini skirts were like what we all lived in the early 2000s. Oh yeah.
And Ugg boots, obviously.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, so I'm going to wear this skirt. And there was a whole argument between the CEO of Warner Brothers and my big time manager about where I was like, yeah. And they were like, you're sitting on a stool, like they're going to be able to see up your skirt. And I was like, whatever, like I'm a rock star, it's fine. And they were like, absolutely not. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. I can't wear what I want to wear now. I can't wear a skirt. It's like a showcase. It's not a huge, crazy thing. And so I was like, fuck you. I wore the skirt. And then there was a whole meeting about my manager. I remember said, I've never been so humiliated in my life. Mind you, this manager had worked with like big metal bands in the 80s, all kinds of debauchery. And I'm like, oh, my panty shot was the most humiliated you've ever been. Holy shit. Like, I just remember being like, oh God. And just like, kind of like slut shamed in a way where I was like, I'm just trying to be myself. Like what, but they had this idea of what they wanted me to be, which was like, like legitimate singer-songwriter, which means that I'm not allowed to be sexy. I'm not allowed to be myself. So it was like, and I remember being like, don't you guys want to like objectify me? I don't understand. Like, isn't that like what I've heard about the music industry is that everyone wants like a sexy little Pop-Tart, and they weren't having it. And I was miffed about it. I was like,
and God forbid if you wore pants, they would have been like, oh, look how homely she is. You got to put it out there. We're containing it.
They couldn't win. I also got in a big fight when I was like 28, by the way, with Epic about wearing cat eyeliner. They're like, you need to lose the cat eyeliner. And I was like, what? Why? And they're like, we're going to send someone over to like teach you how to do makeup. I'm like, I'm literally a grown ass woman. Are you kidding me? And then they were like, we're going to send you someone to teach you how to pose for pictures. I was like, I've already been doing this for like 12 years. Like, and so someone like came over and we stood in front of a mirror, and I was like, this is so humiliating. And I just remember like bursting into tears and like trying to do my makeup and being like, I'm not allowed to do the cat eye, and just like all of the little bullshit. I'm like, nobody cares. Is that going to make or break me if I have cat eyeliner? No. Anyway, so I think that a lot of that should have changed.
They want to make it think that they do, because then they own you, and then you think that you're a product of their creation.
Everybody wants to have a say because everyone's scared of losing their jobs, because it's like a revolving door of people. Nobody ever stays at those labels for long. You get signed somewhere that you have a champion, and then your champion's like, bye, I'm going to another label, or like, I'm over this, I'm going to get into real estate. And you're like, what? Like, this is my whole dream. And now I don't have anyone at the label that gives a shit what I'm doing. So, I mean, that's really common. But anyway, you're right. Everyone wants to have their fingerprints on you, so they feel like they own a piece of you.
Yes. Until you, thank goodness we're at a time where people can be their own independent artist and put things out on their own. When you were I know that you, jumping forward a little bit, that you've re-recorded so many of your, we now call it Taylor's version. You've made Bonnie's version of the songs that the label kept the masters to. Mm-hmm. Why was it important to you and for you to do that?
Well, what had happened was when I went on that tour that I told you about, I played all of these songs. First of all, like I said, I was so happy when I made this album. I was like, finally, I'm making music that I love for me. And I'm like in my songwriting prime. This is like, I just wrote Teenage Dream, just finished Roar. I was like in it, working with some of the best people in the world. And I wrote these songs that I was so, so proud of. And I feel like I finally fixed that kind of cognitive dissonance between like who I am as a person and what my music sounds like. Like I finally made it work. And I went on this tour and all of these fans heard it. And then I left the label and everyone was like, well, when are those songs coming out? And I recently found a forum online that's like 500 pages long and like 10 years old of these fans discussing the unreleased album. And like they had found leaked demos, they had bootleg live performances, they dissected the lyrics, they knew everyone that wrote on it, like all of this. And I was like, well, if you care that much about it. And it made me so happy because I was so heartbroken to lose those songs where I was like, I love these so much, but they'll never come out. And also at the time, it was kind of like the tail end of the sparkly 2010s pop era, where everyone was kind of like, things got oversaturated, everything started to sound the same, and then the culture shifts. And so then it was like, everything sounded like Drake, and then we have Lorde, and then we have Billie Eilish, and it's like, people rebel against what's like overly popular, right? Mm-hmm. Same thing in like the 80s where it was like, oh, like over the top hair metal stuff. And then Nirvana comes along and and all those people are done, So I was like, oh, okay, well that era's over. So I guess I need to shift my thinking anyway. I didn't know then that like really pop culture goes in cycles of like 5 years until something gets totally oversaturated. And then a Nirvana has to come along and shake things up. But it always comes back. And it also has to do with the economy. When things are not going well in the economy, people don't want to listen to sad, quiet songs. They want to escape. And so pop music has come back in a major way. And I think it's still going to continue to grow. So it was kind of just perfect timing where I was like, I was seeing all of these TikToks about people being like, bring back 2010s pop music. Like, we miss the party. And I was like, well, I have this whole beautiful album that never saw the light of day and the fans want it. So fuck it. I'm just going to do it. And at first I reached out to the label and was like, hey, what do you think? Do you think we could it's been so long. No one's paying attention. Like, can I just get these back? And they were like, no.
Just give it to me.
Yeah. I mean, it was like months of like me like not wanting to pay for a lawyer for it because I was like, I don't know if this is going to be worth it or not. Just like emails and old legal records and old master, like trying to find, And then I finally was like, you know what? It's just easier to re-record them. So that's what I did.
Did it feel really special to revisit those lyrics and that time in your life 10 years later?
It was definitely really interesting and a walk down memory lane and being like, okay, some of this I think could be punched up and be better and I can change some lyrics. And being like, why did I do that? And then I get into the lyric and I'm like, oh, I see why, because that rhymes with that and that's okay. And then I already went down this path and that didn't work. Okay, well, then this is the best version of it, But like I went through with a fine-tooth comb every single song and was like, did I make the right decision or was this a rush thing? And like almost every time I was like, yeah, I did that for a reason. It's just funny to like revisit. I don't know if you've ever like written something and just like never listened to it again. And then you hear it like a few years later and you're like, I wrote this. And then you listen to it and you're like, oh, it's like listening to someone else because you don't even remember what you did. Have you ever had that experience?
I've had that. Like, I mean, I haven't, I've really just like shut down anytime anything with music is like talked about, I'm like, that was a different life for me. But even though I love it so much, I do that with like, I don't know. I've had such a complicated relationship with it, like I truly, like my trajectory was instead of going to like the next label or finding myself in writers' rooms, I got like my kind of like kept me going, and my like second chance came in the form of my producer at the time called me up and was like, do you need a job? And I literally was like, yeah. Like I too did not finish high school. Technically I graduated through correspondence, but like not really. And I had no work as like a waitress. I had no waitressing work, which in LA you need like minimum like 3 years experience. It was very hard to find a waitressing job in LA. And so my producer that I'd worked with I got a job as a music director when Miley Cyrus did the Best of Both Worlds tour. And so
that's
he
huge.
called me up and was like, do you need a job? And I was like, yeah. And so I was her backup singer.
Amazing.
For a year, like about a year, until I got let go from that because I'm not a great backup singer, but learned a lot. And also like for me, that was the perspective of like, oh, this is like that's what she does even at the age of like 14. And I don't I can't do that. Like I just kind of slowly realized I don't know if this is what I'm meant to do with my life. So I think that maybe eventually I'll find my way back to a form of it, but it would have to be for me because I think I believed the narrative of too many men for so long. And anytime I kind of tiptoed back into it, I'd quickly kind of get like shut down that it's not my thing. It's not really my thing. Like I'm not that serious. I don't really play an instrument. I don't really write. I think it would be a very interesting world to kind of tiptoe back into at some point.
I mean, it's definitely a labor of love. And it's labor, and it's free labor for the most part. So it's like, if you got to love it, if you don't love it, and if like, it's not calling to you, then like, don't bother because it's you got to really love it. If you don't love it, then you're going to be miserable, Yeah.
So I haven't had that with music, but I have written like I'll kind of get in the zone or like the sleepy type where I'll just have to like write my big feelings out, type it out on my computer, and then just kind of save it or I'll just like minimize the screen and it'll come up when I open my computer and from like a couple months ago, and I'll be like, oh, that's an interesting worded sentence. Like, nice. Okay, that's not so terrible. I know how to put words together. I like to write.
You like to write. You just don't like the music industry.
I just don't like the music industry.
Yeah. And
yes, and I think I'm still like learning how to listen to my own voice first and not like just everyone in the room. But for you, is it so lovely? This is also, I think, a really special, yummy time for the world to be going out, being social, going to concerts again, like what you said, like pop music, like needing that like amazing like pop energy, because this has been a really rough couple of years and is still a rough time, I think, just like as in humanity. And to have that like escapism is so wonderful. And so even just seeing like your music videos and like you like back performing, like for you creating this really special, vibrant world, what has that been like, and being at the forefront of it?
It's so satisfying. And it's funny, like I said, like a big reason why I got into wanting to be a musician was because I wanted to make music videos. Like I remember watching like the Thriller music video and being like, I want to do that. Like I want to make these little mini movies where I get to sing and dance and perform and like tell a story. So for me, like, because when we were growing up, like TRL was everything. Like everything. Like MTV ran the music industry and the radio, obviously. But that's how you were introduced to artists. And now I feel like there are so many options out there, and it's amazing that it's been democratized. But it's really like we're not all having the same experience the way that we used to, where everyone, I think they call it like monoculture or something, where it's like everyone is having the same experience because we're all listening to the same radio station, we're watching the same TV show, we're watching, and now it's like everyone's attentions are split into these little niche communities, which is really cool because it gives everyone else a chance. Where it used to be like, there are 20 artists on the chart, and those are the only people that you're going to know. And so everybody knows every word to every song. And it's just not that way anymore. But what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So getting into the music video stuff, like I started directing. I also wrote and directed a short film during the pandemic. And that was like a really fun experience for me. I ended up winning a bunch of awards in the festival circuit, which was totally unexpected. But like, I really am interested in directing and in fusing music and picture. Like, that's really what excites me. It's like the combination of the two. I think that's why I felt so unsatisfied being behind the scenes, was because I had no say in the visual that would accompany whatever I was writing. And I'm such a visual artist. But the thing is, like, music videos don't make any money. Like, it's fully just a vanity project. And so for me, I'm like, this is just the art that I love to make. And I'm like spending all my own money doing it. And I'm like, whatever. I get to look at my archive. I get to look at my repertoire and be like, look at all this cool shit I made. So it's like, I don't really expect to get anything back from these music videos. And like, people are like, why are you wasting your money on this? And I'm like, because it makes me happy. And that's my idea of success, is doing what I love. So, and also I'm like, I'm not, look, age is just a number, whatever. But I'm like, I got to do it now. I got to do it now. And I don't want to wake up and be 50 and be like, damn, I wish I'd done that. I wish I had made that music video. So I'm just doing it. It's really just kind of for me and for the fans to give a shit. But like, I have a very small but mighty fan base. But like, I don't expect these music videos to like do anything for me necessarily, other than I just get to look back and be proud of what I did and enjoy the process.
It's like that's the stuff, It's like how often do people get to say that? That's a beautiful, and that's a bold thing. Not everyone has the guts to be able to put themselves and put their time and their energy and their vulnerability and their creation out into the world and be like, you know what? It's really because I just want, like, I had to make it, and I had to see it, and I have to know it exists. And like, I feel fulfilled from that feeling.
Yeah, it feels like it's complete. Like when I can put a visual with a song, then it feels like it's complete. Yeah. And when I don't get to do that, then I'm like, it's not a full piece of art for me yet,
This is probably such a cheeseball question, but I fucking love cheeseball questions. What would today's Bonnie say to 16-year-old Bonnie on her first day in LA?
I would probably encourage her to collaborate more, because once I started collaborating, I love collaborating. Once I started collaborating, like a whole new world opened up for me. I learned so much. I was just very egocentric, I think, because everyone had just told me I was a genius. And so I was like, I don't need anybody. But like, I think I would have like started building a community earlier and had people to collaborate with and learn from. Because I didn't start learning until I started writing with other people. And that wasn't until I was like, 23, 24. So I had like, many years of just sort of floundering and being like, who am I? How do I do this? And I think it's really important to have a community. And I think I also would have told her to stop drinking a lot sooner. But you know what? All of my horrible nightmare experiences with drinking and drugs, I think made me I know made me who I am. And it's important that I had those experiences. And I'm just one of those people that had to learn the hard way, but I'm glad I did.
I know this is a very random question, but I also, every time I hear the song now, it's all I can think about. But did you watch the WeWork? Did you see any of the WeWork stuff? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Did you die knowing that like the song you would wake up to every day was Katy Perry and your song Roar?
It was amazing.
Like, did you hear this and like did you know this before like everyone started like putting out the documentary and like the series that then was streamed after?
No, I did not know that, but it's amazing to hear. No, I love that. I love knowing that like I get to be a piece of somebody's life. And I also love that, I don't know, I guess an ongoing theme in my music and continuing into the single I just put out is just like, is empowerment, is like, fuck the haters, you can do it. Like, I really love uplifting, empowering, kind of inspirational, aspirational. It's kind of my cup of tea. That's kind of my specialty. I think because I have struggled for so long and I kind of write it for myself where I'm like, I need a song to pump me up. Like that was really what Bombastic was, where I was like, fuck these people. Like I'm going to make it work. And Roar was the same way. Like I was really going through some shit when Katy and I wrote Roar, we both were. And so it was really like kind of a battle cry. The songs are important. I don't know. You know, I see like videos online of people that like, you know, are fighting cancer or are, you know, training to go to the Olympics or whatever it is. Like I love a success. I love an underdog story. I love to see an underdog win. I remember I was on an airplane years ago and I was watching Karate Kid. And at the end, he like does the kick and then it's like a freeze frame and he wins and he's like, Mr. Miyagi. And I'm like sobbing on the plane. Like I love an underdog story and like seeing people win and seeing people get over adversity. Like that is really like what it's all about. And I think that that's really what I've become to a lot of my fans too. And that's part of why I kept going. Because I was like, look, I could just go direct. I could just go do other stuff. I could just throw in the towel. But like I have all these people that are like, you are such a good example of just perseverance. And so I'm like, okay, I'll be the poster child for that. Like I get knocked down, I get back up. If I'm here to just demonstrate that that's an option for people, then like, cool. Even if I keep getting knocked down, like, what am I going to do? I can't quit. Even if I tried to quit. I tried to quit.
Get back up. Yeah.
I really was like, God, please remove this, like this yearning for success, for stardom, for whatever it is. And I tried to not be an artist for a while where I was like, okay, that chapter is over and I need to move on. And I was so depressed. I was like, I just got to do what makes me happy. I just got to do it. If not for me, for someone else.
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm glad, because it makes so many other people happy. So truly, I'm glad that you have not quit. And I know, I know that I've been talking your ear off. But I do think it's like such a magical, like in reading other interviews that you have participated in to sit down with you today. I just love when other female artists like run up to another female artist and like my new thing right now at this point, I'm like, I think we all need to lean into being fans. Like this whole like I'm too cool club. I'm like, are we done with that? Are we done with that? Because let's all just like love each other and lean into something. There's no like guilty pleasure. Like just like love something because you fucking love it. Yeah. But I loved reading about Lana Del Rey ran up to you at one point and was just like, that she had been listening to you and was like, you need to make music. Like, where's your music? Like, what's happening? And she became this like little angel that popped up and this little like, you know, God or universe, this little spiritual wink being like, you don't get to quit.
It really was. Like I was like at a weird low point where I didn't know what I was going to do. It was like after I had been like, I shouldn't be an artist. I need to just like stop trying. And then I just like ran into her and she was like, oh my gosh, like you're Bonnie McKee. And I was like, you're Lana Del Rey. Like I was like, I can't believe you know who I am. And then she like showed me on her phone that she had just been listening to Bombastic, like on her way there. And I was like, what? And then she was like, let me call you. And I was like, okay. And then she called me and like gave me a pep talk for like 2 hours. And I was like, wow, I really needed that. And like, that was kind of like the springboard. You know what? I feel like I've spent my whole life waiting for permission to be an artist. Because, after the first thing didn't work out, it was like, okay, you've been humbled, sit down, shut up, write songs for other people. That's that. And so I've spent the past, 12 years or whatever being like, now can I be an artist? Now can I do, And like, I don't know, there was just something about, no, I shouldn't have to ask anybody else, but there's something about like having someone that I really admired and looked up to sort of giving me permission to like set me on a path. So thank you, Lana.
Thank you, Lana. Sometimes we all need a wake-up call from Lana Del Rey, Right? Well, Bonnie, I could chat your ear off forever, truly, but I know I'm like taking up a lot of your time. So I like to close out all my big conversations with a little conversation cool down. Just like a final 5 questions that like the first thing that pops into your mind.
Okay. Uh-oh.
So before we leave you, Bonnie, could you please tell us something that you like?
Something that I like?
Just something that you like.
Just anything?
Anything that you like.
Caviar.
Okay. Have you always liked caviar, or have you been like into it? Because I feel like caviar is having a moment.
Really? Is it?
I feel like it is.
Oh my gosh. Since I was a little kid. Since I was a little kid, I've always loved caviar. And my mom was like, oh boy, we got one with expensive taste.
That's amazing. Okay, what's something that you know?
I know that, I don't know. I don't know anything. I don't know anything. I know that I don't know anything.
What's something that you hate?
I hate when people are mean to each other on the internet. I hate when people are just hateful. I hate.
Yeah.
I hate it.
I know, yeah.
I won't even get into it, but like,
Yep. Yeah.
Jesus. Can't we all just love each other? I don't know.
Speaking of that, what is something that you love that's not friends, family, partners, but something that you love for you?
I love being alone. I love like a solo trip. I love traveling alone. I love silence. I love to just, like, I don't meditate. I just will stare at the wall. I just am like a daydreamer. I love like, I'm an empath, so I'm like very much affected by people's energies around me. And so I love quality time with myself. I love a quiet bubble bath. I really love that.
And last but not least, what is a quirky little fact about you?
I am a craft queen. You give me, like, I'm kind of MacGyver a little bit. You can give me like a safety pin and some Halloween spider webs and some Christmas tree ornaments, and I'll make it into a bubble bath costume like I just did. Oh, that's funny. My Halloween costume this year was just being fresh out of a bathtub. I just realized that was the last thing I said, was that I love baths.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Well, I love speaking with you. Thank you so much, Bonnie. It's so lovely to meet you. It has been truly like, I've just been even reading your interviews and like looking, like watching and reading through your career and listening through your career, your musical career has just been a joy, in preparing to sit down with you. So truly, thank you for making your art. Yeah, you don't get to give up. You just don't. And we'll make sure Lana Del Rey, if you ever, are stressed again, Lana, get on the phone, call Bonnie.
Thank you so much. Thank you. These are great questions. I feel like I'm really talking to someone that's been through the same things I have. So it's really refreshing. Thank you.
A Super Bloom podcast is hosted by me, Candice King, produced by Melissa D. Montz and Diamond Imprint Productions, edited by Diane Kang, post-production sound by Coco Lawrence, and advertising partnership with Acast.